Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The last NFL coaching vacancy has been filled as the Commanders hired Dan Quinn. The hire is not as much of a letdown as some around DC are making it seem. Also, the Thunder have officially announced themselves as contenders, and the Rockets, trying to fast forward their rebuild, will be a mistake. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. If your first bet of $5 or more wins, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
When it comes to the hiring cycle in the NFL, you don't usually want to be last but not least, because a lot of times you are least. We'll see how the Commanders end up feeling about this. Dan Quinn is the new head coach of the Washington Commanders. Last in line, never last in line with us. David Harrison from Locked On Commanders joins me now. And David, we talked just a couple days ago about where the Commanders search stays, because Bobby Slowick was going back to Houston. Ben Johnson, who everyone just assumed was going to be the Commanders' next head coach, was staying in Detroit. And you told me, I don't know about Dan Quinn. I don't know if that's going to make this process be a good process. Here we are. What is your thoughts now?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, man, and this is what I've been trying to preach to the Locked On Commanders audience, is like, you just kind of have to just have patience and show and have a little bit of faith and trust in what Josh Harris is doing with new general manager Adam Peters, because so far Josh Harris, as the managing partner of the Washington Commanders, like, it's been a very short tenure, but everything he's said he's going to do and everything he said he's about, he has delivered on. You know what I mean? Even down to, and this seems like such a small, minute detail, but even the giveaway items that they give at some of the games have improved. Like, the quality of them has improved just under the tenure of Josh Harris. And so it just kind of shows you the detail that he is putting into wanting to make this an organization that's first class and making the fan experience and all this other stuff. So when he tells us we're looking for specific criteria, we're looking for leaders of men that are going to tie this locker room together and bring these coaches together, that's what you have to trust that they're going out there and finding. And Adam Peters kind of doubled down on that and said they've got a certain checklist of things they're looking for from their candidates. And, you know, we may never know internally who was their real quote unquote number one candidate, where Dan Quinn landed on that list. But what I do know is, as long as they didn't compromise what they're looking for, if every candidate that they had on their final, here's who we might offer the job to list, met that criteria, then you got a guy that meets the criteria. And if the criteria is going to, or if the process is going to work, then the team needs to do that uncompromisingly. So right now we have no reason to believe that Josh Harris is going to compromise what he intends to do. And in that vein, I think that's where Commanders fans who don't like the hire just kind of have to ride it out and have trust in that until, you know, there's a reason to not.
I think if you're going to make the optimistic case here for Dan Quinn, it's not hard. This is a coach who was one of the hot candidates each of the last two hiring cycles, going back to 2021. He has familiarity in this division. And the last time he was a head coach, he took that team with a quarterback that is not a future Hall of Famer lock by any means, Matt Ryan, and helped that team get to a Super Bowl. This is a team that needs a steady hand as they go through a rebuilding process here with the number 2 overall pick and all of that. How do you think Dan Quinn's arrival, with all the money that they have and all that stuff, changes or affects the way that they're going to approach this upcoming offseason, which is what, the most important offseason in the modern team history, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that, because I mean, this decision, now you have the ripple, you know, of the coordinators, and then obviously into the roster and into the draft picks and how you use the cap space and all that stuff. It's going to have ramifications for the next 5+ years.
Plus new ownership.
For this franchise, and plus the new ownership. So I think what's really interesting is you look at Dan Quinn and you look at his history and you talk about the success that they've had. And a lot of people kind of look at that 28-3, you know, lead that they lost and collapsed against the New England Patriots. Say that's the last time the Falcons were any good. But people forget the very next season, they were back in the playoffs. They were in the divisional round. They did lose in the divisional round. Now, after that, the wheels wheels kind of fell off. But I talked to Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons. He reflected back on that time period and said it was the coordinator hires. He hired the wrong coordinators. They didn't execute, based on what the roster was strong at and all these other things. So that's really what's going to determine, I think, the future of this, the success of this move is what are the next moves following this one immediately in the coaching staff. But what's really interesting, Peter, is when you look at Dan Quinn, and you kind of look at, his time with the Seahawks, the Falcons, he's a very even front, not a lot of blitzing, mostly zone, single high safety type of guy. But then starting in 2020, when he actually hands the reins over to Raheem Morris, the Falcons defense turns into more of an odd front team. Single high is a little bit more split with two safety covers. So they're a little bit even there, even more even on zone man splits, and their blitzing goes up. That is what he adapted to and adopted when he came to Dallas. Like, that's the defense you've seen in Dallas is actually the defense that he and Raheem Morris put on the field the final year he was in Atlanta. So people talk about retreads and not wanting a guy who, fell apart in Atlanta after that. But in reality, the Dan Quinn you've been seeing in Dallas is actually an evolution of the Dan Quinn that was in Atlanta in the first place. So now he comes to this new location. Now he's at the head coach job again. So the further evolution of Dan Quinn is going to be really interesting. And he's going to be doing it in a team mentality. Adam Peters is going to have roster control, but he's going to have input from the coaches and all that stuff. So it's going to be a very team dynamic system. And I think that if Dan Quinn obviously meets the criteria of being that type of personality, then you're going to see a little bit of a mixture of everything. So the coordinators are going to be interesting because you could bring coordinators from Dallas. You bring coordinators from San Francisco. I mean, my perfect world, you get Anthony Weaver to leave Baltimore. He comes in and becomes your maybe assistant head coach, defensive coordinator, and you get a little bit of Baltimore Ravens defense flavor, a little bit of Dan Quinn defensive flavor, and you get a 49ers offensive coordinator. And now you got little bits and pieces of all of it. You just got to make it into your own meal and see if you can mix those ingredients well. But we'll see what happens.
Stay up to date all year on the Washington Commanders by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Commanders on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, it's time to respect the Oklahoma City Thunder. Before we get to that, the NBA All-Star starters and reserves have now been named. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a dub, or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, what are you waiting for? New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. You can also check out the over-unders. On the total score, FanDuel has it at 47.5 for San Francisco and Kansas City to combine. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to join in on the Super Bowl fun. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. We'll leave it to the other shows to argue about the snubs in the NBA All-Star Game. 3 first-time honorees, Jalen Brunson, Tyrese Maxey, and Paolo Banchero, make the reserve squad for the East in the upcoming NBA All-Star Game. By the way, if you want to hear about people argue about snubs, the Locked On Podcast Network is the place for you. Those 3 join Donovan Mitchell, Jaylen Brown, Julius Randle, and Bam Adebayo on that Eastern Conference list. Meanwhile, in the West, a lot of groups of teammates. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard make it together. Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards make it together. Anthony Davis joins his teammate LeBron James, who is a starter. Steph Curry and Devin Booker round out the West. The Knicks did not have Julius Randle for their game against the Pacers and will be without him for some time. The New York Knicks announced Thursday that Randle will be reevaluated in 2 to 3 weeks for the dislocated right shoulder he suffered in Saturday's win over the Miami Heat. That would put his timetable around the All-Star break. This news also a bit of a downer for a fan base that's been riding high lately. New York is coming off the best month the franchise has had in 30 years. They were 14-2 in January to skyrocket up the Eastern Conference standings and move within a game of the Milwaukee Bucks for second place in the conference. In WNBA action, Las Vegas Aces are making moves in free agency, bringing in Kaya Stokes and Megan Gustafson. Locked On Women's Basketball got the perspective of current Aces player Sydney Colson on the signings.
I didn't know. Like, I saw people talking the other day, like when they were saying Megan might be signing, they were talking about her dog, and I wasn't.
Yeah.
People are funny, but we obviously have a lot of dogs on the Aces, and so just one more fur baby to add to that bunch. Tamiki is just like so solid and so consistent. You know exactly what you're getting. And the crazy thing is she's capable of even more. Like she probably doesn't even realize like how much more she can give offensively. And people, like have a lot of, this is just like Twitter and social media in general. People are just negative, but they talk a lot about we're not scoring enough. And I'm just like, we got a lot of people who can score. She's very solid on the defensive end, very sturdy. Like she's held us down in a starting position for a year and a half, or maybe like a little under a year and a half, because she started playing in that 2022.
And in the NHL, the Vancouver Canucks acquired an all-star center from the Calgary Flames, but some are wondering if the Canucks got fleeced.
How's the NHL world feeling about this? Because I'm feeling as if everyone else got to be scared. Speaking of being scared, I think I would be scared if I was the Calgary Flames, because what they got to me is risky business. And some people were commenting that, this Lindholm trade allowed Craig Conway to set the tone for the trade deadline. A part of me is like, dude, if I was a Flames fan, maybe I would have waited a bit longer just to get more of a guarantee on that NHL player going to you. Because Kuzmenko, man, oh man, I don't know about him right now. Straight up. Well, who are you getting? A guy that may be going back to Russia in 2025. Straight up. Anyways, Kyle Bauer and Trevor Beggs, that's me being a bully. That's me being a bully to Kuzmenko, man. Right before he gets traded, I said the word sucked. It's crazy, man. Ridiculous. I was about to say sorry for that, but then he left. Anywho.
The Oklahoma City Thunder are good. Like second seed in the West, good. Like 33-15, good. The question that's going to be asked, and that we're going to ask over the next week, is what do they need to do to be championship finals good? Rylan Stiles from Locked On Thunder joins me now. And Rylan, I'll put that question to you simply. What does this team need to do at the trade deadline, if anything, to get to where they can be, where the talent on this team says they can go, which is the finals?
I think that this team has to add another tool to their toolbox, not go get a big star, not go make a splashy trade. I don't think that there's going to be one available to do that anyway, but adding a curveball to the repertoire could do them some good in the postseason. Getting a veteran big man who, even if he doesn't play the majority of the game or at all in some cases, just having the threat of, if we have to go big, you have someone on the bench there would be wonderful for Oklahoma City, because at the end of the day, to get to those aspirations, to get over the hump and try to contend this year, it's still, no matter who you go trade for, going to fall on these young players to continue to be uncommon as they have all year long. They're going to have to continue to buck trends of what young teams can do. There's not some magic elixir that they can get in a week to make them older or to fix any of those inexperienced issues. It's just going to be continuing to be an outlier. So the only thing really there is to do at the deadline, in my opinion, for the Thunder is go get you the opportunity to play bigger in games. Not that they're ever going to lean on that, because they also create advantages by playing small, but just having the threat of the option would do great for OKC. And I think that they can reasonably acquire a veteran big man.
So you're saying this is not just like if Chet Holmgren were in year 2, they would be in better shape, though of course they probably would be. He'd be a year stronger after having played in the league. This is, you'd like depth at that big position, whether it's a center or just another forward with length who can muck things up a little bit.
Correct. You want to see the Thunder go out and get a traditional big rebounding threat, because even though they would never play someone that way for bulk minutes, in the postseason, when the game changes, when the game slows down, you might face off with a team that forces you to play that way. I remember back whenever Rick Carlisle put on Boban Marjanovic on the Clippers for just a 5-minute junk it up period to get the Mavericks back into a game. He obviously did not play Boban for the length of that series or for any substantial minutes. And Boban can't even play substantial minutes in the 82-game season. But having that option was valuable for the Mavericks in that series. So those wrinkles do matter, and the Thunder are in great position to go get some of those curveballs at the deadline with their assortment of second-round picks.
Do you have a name in mind?
I think that you look at Kelly Olynyk in Utah, see what the price is out there. Andre Drummond's another popular one from Chicago. Those two guys specifically, I think Olynyk fits better and would contribute more, but either one would be a huge boost for Oklahoma City.
Okay, let's say they do nothing. They stand pat. The prices are just not in line with where they want them to be. We know how the organization is there, how Sam Presti is there with his picks. He's very precious about how he wants to handle all of this. Is this team, let's just say they get sort of normal developmental processes here from their young guys. Can they just go out and shock the world anyway?
I think that they can. I think that it would be sort of disrespectful to just assume that this team, despite their age, will just all of a sudden forget how to play basketball when the calendar turns to April. They're not going to have to just reinvent the wheel in April, because whenever you've watched this team play, it's not as though things have broken perfectly for them. They've won games where they shot the lights out of the gym. They've won games where they shot under 30% from three. They've won games against bigger teams and had to scrap and fight and claw. They've won games in the half court. They've won games pushing the pace. They've done it all this year to get to those 33 wins. And so they've proven they can play pretty much any style of basketball. I don't think that that changes just because they're young and just because the calendar says April. So this Thunder team is going to be as good as they can be in the postseason. And no matter what they do next Thursday, it's still going to come back to all these young guys we're talking about right now. And so I think that this team, the most interesting part of it is, can they continue to do this? They've so far continued to shock the world, exceed expectations. Nobody thought that they'd be fighting for the 1 seed right now at this point in the year. And if I told you that back in October, it would have been a laughing stock, but here we are. And so whenever you look at the NBA, if you have an MVP caliber player and you have a couple all-stars next to him, caliber player all-stars, you're going to feel good about that team, no matter what their birth certificate says. So I think that you should feel good about the Thunder.
Stay up to date all year on the Oklahoma City Thunder by subscribing to Locked On Sports today and Locked On Thunder on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the Rockets may be making a grave mistake at the trade deadline. The Houston Rockets have been in a rebuild for the last few years, but they've added some impressive but unproven young talent. The scuttlebutt around the league is the Rockets are looking to fast forward the clock, something Pat the designer tells Nick Angstad is a bad idea on a recent Locked On NBA.
The Houston Rockets now trying to take a step forward. Alfred Sengun, your guy, is finally in the forefront. He's their star player, and they're wanting to trade Jalen Green. Are they skipping steps here?
100%. And I think it's going to be something that bites them in the butt in the long run, right? I get it, right? You're trying to move things along, but you took this job knowing that there were young players there that needed to develop. Jalen Green, a very good offensive asset. I think that maybe the part with Jalen Green that gets a little tough is it consistently efficient scoring? But over the last 10, you have seen a lot more of that efficient scoring come in. And his last 5, especially, really going out there and balling out. Like, I feel like it's very tough to say that Jalen Green isn't a part of a winning culture moving forward, but maybe they view Jalen Green very similar to what Zach LaVine has become in this NBA, where a guy who definitely can be a top scorer. Well, not that. Let's hope not. A guy who definitely could be a top scorer in the league, a guy who can put the ball in the basket, a guy who to me contributes in a lot of different ways, but does he contribute to consistent winning? It's a surprise to me that he's so quick to move off a player, though, who's 21 years old and can score the way that Jalen Green can.
It depends on what you're trying to do. Is it a bad idea? Is it a good idea? And it's a neutral idea until you tell me who they're adding, until you tell me how they're going to go about it. Are they giving up on Jalen Green? How good do you think Jalen Green is? I don't know. There's a lot of potential there, but we also know that potential gets you fired in professional sports until it becomes productivity on the court. So are they going to trade away? Are they going to give up the farm in a Rudy Gobert-like package to bring in a star that's not going to make them a true contender in the Western Conference, yeah, that's a bad idea. But bringing in an established star or borderline star level player and sacrificing some of your young pieces to do it, I got to see the deal. Got to see what it looks like. We've seen teams like Houston fast forward their rebuild with precisely these kinds of moves. So it's not a good idea. It's not a bad idea until we know what it's going to look like. It's always, always, always about the details. And finally, Ravens tight end Mark Andrews is a hero before the Super Bowl even began. On Thursday, Andrews assisted a woman who experienced a medical emergency during a Southwest Airlines flight from Baltimore to Phoenix. Andrews, who is a type 1 diabetic, provided a diabetic testing kit, which led to stabilizing the woman for the remainder of the flight. Wait, Mark Andrews is flying Southwest? What's happening here? Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, we get you set for Super Bowl week. So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.